Welcome to Track Announcer's Notebook. We're delighted to be doing an all vintage road racing show. We've got representatives from the VRRA, the USCRA, as well as the American Historic Racing Motorcycle Association, more affectionately known as AHRMA. We'll get to that, but first up, we've got our Nodell's Notes for a Monday, February the 15th, Family Day here in Ontario and President's Day in the United States. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I'm just going to cue it. And so in the Supercross series, Pat, Cooper Webb won the race, obviously. Ken Roxon finished second and Justin Brayton was third. But Ken Roxon seems to be the man still out front with a pretty commanding lead at 161 points. Cooper Webb sits second and Eli Tomac is third.
And he'll be back in Orlando this Saturday, and then, of course, a week gap. And then they'll be in Daytona for the Daytona Supercross. I think Eli Tomac, multi-time winner of that race, is going to be tough at Daytona. That race is March the 6th.
That's right. And then, so it looks like some positive news for Mark Marquez this past week. The Works Honda HRC factory rider. He seems to be recovering there with positive feedback that he is recuperating. Don't know when he'll be able to start actively riding or even if when he'll be ready for the racing season, but things do look a little bit more positive than they did. And then Yamaha also unveiled their works effort actually yesterday as well, Pat, and it'll be Maverick Vinales alongside Fabio Quartararo, who moves up from the Petronas satellite effort.
And there's, you can see the big Monster Energy drink sponsorship on the factory Yamaha. It should be a very competitive MotoGP season once they get rolling.
Definitely. It'll be interesting to see how Quartararo adjusts to being a works rider now with, I would take it, more responsibility as the go-to guy, as though he has showed very strong the last couple seasons. And then there was also some great news here with regard to American Nicky Hayden. They're doing he's being inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America, and that was just announced on February 3rd. And it's actually it was just announced at the Daytona International Speedway prior to the Daytona 24 Rolex.
Well, certainly a well-deserving inductee into the Motorsport Hall of Fame of America that's actually housed right there at Daytona International Speedway, where the old Daytona USA exposition used to be for many, many years. So a fitting award and induction into the Hall of Fame of the late Nicky Hayden.
And then on sticking to some Daytona news, Pat, this is Michael Dunlop's Yamaha R6 that he'll be campaigning the Daytona 200 on.
Okay. That is one of probably a few riders who are going to be in the Daytona 200 who were scheduled to race in the Isle of Man and the Northwest 200. Both of those events, of course, canceled. So I think some of the European riders looking at the Daytona 200 as a possible place to start their 2021 racing calendar.
And this is the Daytona 200 monument plaque that's happening at the Daytona Monument.
Yeah, that's the main monument there. We'll touch on it a little bit later on because I know AHRMA on March the 10th, it's the traditional Wednesday Daytona 200 monument event. Bob Coy is also involved with that, but AHRMA will be putting up a plaque at the Daytona Monument, as well as, I believe, 2019 Daytona 200 champion Kyle Wyman is going to be there as well. So we'll get into that a little bit later on.
And then American Flat Track, they've announced a few changes with their racing series. They're going to have, or Harley, I should say, with the American Flat Track series is going to be posting contingency this year for some of the private efforts that are going to continue in both the Super Twin classes aboard Harley equipment. So it looks like the payout's pretty decent. For a win at a national event, it's going to pay $1,000, and they pay all the way through to 10th. And there's a $12,500 championship bonus for anyone that wins aboard the XG 750.
Yeah, and of course, American Flat Track kicks off their season at Daytona with a doubleheader at Barberville on the half mile there. That is Friday and Saturday, March 12 and 13. We'll be covering the results of that racing on our series of shows that we'll have during Daytona Bike Week.
And then Royal Enfield also, Pat is proud to announce they're doing again the Build, Train, and Race program, and that's spearheaded. It's a women's program, and Melissa Paris is heavily involved with that. And you know, the women build and race the motorcycles and train together. It's been pretty well documented, but they're continuing to support that program, and I think it's great for racing.
And the flat track program, I believe they'll race the women participants in that program will race in four AFT races. And then, of course, we covered it here on Track Announcer's Notebook. They have a similar program for road racing. No announcement as to where the women who'll be road racing will be running. Who knows? Maybe they'll be at Barber in October to run as part of the series of races there.
And then some news, I actually got a call from a gentleman out of Tennessee this past week, Pat, and he follows our show. His name's Brian LaRose, and he's part of a Friends of Oak Ridge group that has a private Facebook group. And there's a track being developed by a gentleman named Rusty Billett, and he's the developer, and this track is in the plans. It's a little bit east of Knoxville, and it looks like a beautiful facility. And in talking to them, they're really hopeful that they can have motorcycle events at the track, and they want to actually consult the motorcycle industry or racers to get their feedback. Because the one thing I pointed out is all the years that when I was racing or whenever you'd hear about a new racetrack is really the motorcycle community wasn't as involved, and certain safety measures weren't really considered.
Well, that's good. And we invite them to reach out to the representatives we have here on our show tonight, as well as other racing organizations in terms of how do you build it so that it's motorcycle friendly, not just for racing, but for track days and other things like that.
That's right. And again, they would like to, I think at some point down the road, we can probably have them on the show and maybe get into more of a Q&A with them.
Okay.
And then here we are back. I can stop sharing the screen unless you want me to leave it up, but that's it for Nodell's notes.
Okay, so you can leave it up. We'll get to the schedules and whatnot, but right now I'd like to welcome our representatives from the various organization, the American Historic Racing Motorcycle Association. We got Cindy McLean, along with Brian Larabure, and from USCRA, Bob Coy, along with Doug Donnellan, and from our own Canadian VRRA, Vintage Road Racing Association, Kirby Crosby. So everyone, welcome to our all vintage edition of Track Announcer's Notebook. Stuart, we've got the schedules up. So Cindy and Brian, we know you kick things off this coming weekend at Roebling Road. And there you can see the schedule. Why don't you walk us through this 2021 schedule? And I guess a footnote, do you believe, with or without fans, you'll be able to conduct this schedule that you put out a number of months ago, of course, culminating with your incredible event at Barber Motorsports Park in Birmingham, Alabama on October 7th through the 10th? Cindy, go ahead, Brian.
Sure. We've got a full schedule this year. Fortunately, last year the schedule was shortened a bit by the outbreak of the COVID. We did kick off our season at Laguna last year and had a great event that was well attended. And we made it to Roebling before the hammer dropped, so to speak, and our season was suspended. For 2021, we've got an 11-round series for road racing, and we foresee a very successful, well-attended from a racer standpoint program, and we've got all the COVID practices in place, and most of the states that we're going to already are allowing fans, And we're hoping that by the time we get to Laguna, that it'll be pretty easy to have a large group of people there at Laguna.
Well, that's great news. Cindy, what were the key things that you learned from dealing with the COVID outbreak and the procedures and protocols you needed to do to make sure everyone was safe? Because we're not talking about teenagers and 18 to 24-year-olds racing motocross. This is a mature clientele, if you will. What was the key learning points from last year that you'll be able to take over into 2021?
Mostly we had to be alert to what was going on locally so that we could customize our situation around the local guidelines. But our membership, our racers, were really good about wearing their masks whenever they were not able to social distance. We did a lot of sanitizing. The big thing is we had to develop a waiver, a COVID waiver, to protect, of course, the organization. We also developed a situation event page on our website so that as events were canceled, we could notify our membership as quickly as that happened so that they could make their plans accordingly. They became pretty good at going to the event situation page first before picking up the phone to see whether an event was going to take place or not. And this obviously wasn't just road racing, it was across the board for all of our disciplines. So it was the new normal. It was I know we love saying that, but that basically we just learned as we went, and we had a cooperation of our membership, which was tremendous.
Yeah, and of course everything culminated at Barber. I don't believe you're allowed to have fans in Barber, as I recall. What was the turnout like at Barber, and how was it different from past years where, you know, reports of 50 to 60,000 people over the 4 days were commonplace?
Well, obviously we didn't have near the number of spectators or near the number of attendees, but it was complicated by the Delta hurricane that came through. So a lot of people that might have otherwise stayed and raced didn't come. We had people that just didn't even unpack when they started looking at the weather.
Yeah.
So that there was that. In fact, I had planned to race that weekend, but every time I put my leathers on to go out on the track, it started raining again. So that did impact it. So we had a combination of the COVID and the weather.
A double whammy.
Yeah.
I popped on the AHRMA website, taking a look at the entries. It looks like the entry for Roebling Road this coming weekend's pretty healthy, including a couple of things you're going to be doing Thursday and Friday there. That is your road racing school and also your sidecar racing school. Is the entry what you hoped it would be?
I'll let Brian add into this, but I have seen some people moving their practice to Friday because it's calling for heavy thunderstorms. So, you know, we go with the flow. We have to adjust depending on what's going on with the weather, etc.
Brian,
add to that, Brian?
Go ahead, Pat. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, what is your feeling in terms of things coming up this weekend at Roebling Road in terms of the entry?
The numbers look pretty normal from a year-over-year standpoint, which is pleasant, you know, a good surprise, a happy surprise. Our student uptake, I think we're close to 20 students, new students at the event, which is always good to see. The shifting in the weather, that's pretty common for the practice day, but you know, it'll be a busy, heavily attended event all weekend, rain or shine. A lot of the racers at Barber even raced in the rain. I'm one of them. I didn't do so well on Sunday. I fell down, but that's another story.
A lot of people fell down.
Yeah. And now, in addition to being a volunteer worker for AHRMA this weekend, you're both going to race. Cindy, I know you're in 200 Grand Prix, but I think there's one other class you're running in.
Yes, I'm doing the CB 160 class, which has a Le Mans start. I believe Brian races that class as well. And it's really entertaining for the spectators when we have them, because for those that are not familiar with it, we do our warm-up lap and then we hand off our motorcycles with the engines turned off to our handlers, go across the track, and when the green flag drops, we run across the track and push start the bike. So it's an exhibition race, and it's not for the faint of heart, because it is kind of challenging. So that's what I do, is CB 160 and the 200 GP, and I probably won't be working that much because most of my work is done prior to arriving at the track.
And your husband, Alex, I think is loading up the bikes as we speak in Maryland. Actually, he isn't right now because he's joined us here on Track Announcer's Notebook, but we had the pleasure, along with Richard Chambers, to announce so many of Alex's wins when AHRMA ran at Daytona. What does he have his sights set on this year? Another 3 or 4 championships? Because I know he runs a lot of classes.
He's signed up for 4 classes, and that's what he's going to be going after. He'll be racing the 350 GP, Classic 60s, pre-40s, and what was the last one? Class C foot shift.
Okay, and I know in that 350 Grand Prix class, he's going to be renewing a rivalry that's been going on for a long time with David Roper. I see Roper has put in an entry. I think David's got to be 74-ish, right around there. And the Ageless Wonder will be at Roebling Road. When is he ever going to retire?
When he can't ride anymore.
And Brian, what about you? You're doing some racing this weekend as well at Roebling Road?
I'm bringing a lot of artillery. I don't know how fit I'll be to run all of it because I was knocked out myself by the COVID, and I'm just bouncing back. But I'll be in the CB 160 with Cindy. If I have the energy, I'll be in the GP 200 also. I'll be in 500 Premier on my matchless G50. I'll be in Next Gen Superbike 1 and 2 on a Ducati 888 Corsa, a 996 Corsa. And then I'll be in Battle of the Twins 900 Open on my Pirabon X60 air-cooled. And then Sounds of Thunder 2 on my Pirabon X80 848 powered liquid-cooled bike.
Wow, that's a busy weekend. A lot of track time. Before we get to Bob Coy and Doug Donlon with USCRA, Kirby Crosby with VRRA. We'll bring you in after we've talked to Bob and Doug. But before that, I think we've got some questions and comments. Let's go to Stuart Nodell. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. A lot of people are responding into the Q&A, so that's great. First, we've got Claude Gerard. Sorry, Pat wants to say thanks for doing the show. You're doing a great job. Loves tuning in. Then we've got Pete Swedish, who's a regular contributor to the show. And he's asking, there's been some loose talk about a single class vintage race at Moto America rounds. Has anyone taken a serious run at the idea, or is it just a dream?
Cindy or Brian, has anybody at Moto America talked to either USCRA or AHRMA about a singles class?
Well, we ran a few events with Moto America at New Jersey Motorsport Park in 2018 and 2019, I believe. And they have since decided they started their own vintage class, and they're looking for like very bikes with provenance, really exclusive vintage machines. I don't know how well it's kicked off, especially because they launched it and then COVID hit. So I don't even know if they were running the class much last season.
Well, I think they did do a vintage race at Laguna Seca at the end of the year. We'll see what happens there. Stuart?
Okay, the other comment was regarding David Roper, and I have to say, I remember doing a vintage event at Mosport a few years ago now, and I remember him being pretty old then, and he was extremely quick, so it's incredible that he's still going strong. Then Richard Chambers has commented that he's got a Mary Growth photo of Bob Coy and Kenny Roberts.
All right. Well, maybe we'll get Richard to send that, and we'll share that on the show another time. Is that it, Stu?
And I guess for Bob, he's just got a one piece. I think it's for Bob too, about what he was thinking after he qualified the Norton in the AMA F1 in 1976.
Okay, Bob, you want to answer that for Richard?
It was pretty amazing. I took my Norton Manx there and qualified in the national, and against a field of TZ 750s, and I qualified, and I ran until I got lapped by Kenny Roberts, and I decided to pull off the track and get out of the way at that point. But it was as fast through the infield as anybody, but just couldn't match the banking speeds.
No, for sure. We'll get back to Brian and Cindy with AHRMA, but let's continue with Bob Coy and Doug Donlon. Bob, you had to pivot last year when COVID hit, but you were able to get in some events right at the end of the summer as part of that revamped Laconia Bike Week, and then you ran a single event on Labor Day Monday. How tough was it for your organization to push through and at least get some racing in?
It was very difficult. We had to cancel our two events at the Canaan track in Canaan, New Hampshire. And when the COVID really hit and they moved Laconia Motorcycle Week to the end of August, the Speedway was very generous, and they were able to move a Porsche Club off of that weekend and give us that weekend to run our FIM North America race. But we just ran two events last summer because of the COVID.
And Stuart, have you got the flip up the USCRA schedule? We looked at the AHRMA schedule a little bit earlier, and we'll just have maybe Doug Donlon. Next one. No, there it is. So Doug Donlon, not 5 or 6, but I think a realistic schedule, including the opening weekend of Laconia Bike Week in 2021 on June 12th and 13th. We'll talk a little bit about that Weirs Beach hill climb, and then you've got the 2 single-day Monday events on August 2nd and September 6th. So 4 days of racing. Tell us how you and Bob sort of came to this schedule for 2021 for USCRA.
I'd say that a good part of it has to do with the pandemic. We wanted to be smart about, realistically planning what kind of season we'll be able to have and not have to cancel events. Currently, we've been assured that Bike Week will go off in June, as it typically does. So we're looking for that to be our launch of the season in June. And then immediately during Bike Week, that Tuesday is when we do our Tower Hill Climb, which has been a wildly successful event. We run vintage bikes on a paved uphill course in downtown Weirs Beach. It's a lot of fun, draws a big, huge crowd. It's, we have everything from tank ships. I think we have a cutoff of 1972. So 72 and earlier, machines going up the hill at Tower Hill. And then we adjusted our schedule a little bit. We usually typically start the season in May. And we've moved that event to August. And we continue with the Labor Day event, which is, we've been doing that for 22, 23 years now.
Bob Coy, that was a brilliant move, I thought, resurrecting the old Weirs Beach hill climb. We'll let you fill in that story. That actually began decades ago when that road that's now paved was just a dirt road, and it was part of that motorcycle racing festival that went on in and around Laconia and Weirs Beach. How did you come up with that idea to resurrect that event?
Actually, it was a few years ago, and the Laconia Motorcycle Week people came to us and said, would you do this? Would you be interested in doing it? And I was a little apprehensive at first because, we're dealing with the crowds right off the street. There is no admission fee to it. It's just public roads, and it's right off of Lakeshore Avenue. And we looked at it and we discussed it with the town fathers and discussed it with the police, and we figured we could pull it off, and it's just been a real hoot. It starts, right off Lakeshore Avenue and climbs up the hill. The original hill climb started in 1916 and it ran till 1924. And then the hill climb eventually moved over to Gunstock, to the ski jump over there. And that's where it is today. But we're doing the reenactment on the Tuesday of Motorcycle Week.
And Stuart, I think you've got a few images of the Weirs Beach hill climb. There it is. And Richard Chambers made it out that year to do the announcing as some of these classic and vintage bikes run up that hill. That's, I think, a good quarter mile.
It's at least a quarter mile.
Go ahead, Stuart. I think we've got a couple of more, some of the competitors.
That's
it? Okay. That's just the one. So that'll be on the Tuesday in between the USCRA vintage races at New Hampshire Speedway and then the Laconia Classic the following weekend. Bob and Doug, we're going to come back to you a little bit later on, but let's bring in Kirby Crosby. Kirby, you got to take yourself off mute. But the Vintage Road Racing Association that began in 1980, they had some big celebrations ready to go for last year. And of course, COVID put an end to that pretty quickly. But Kirby Crosby, you were able to get in that one event on Labor Day weekend at Shannonville, and you've come back this year with a nice schedule, a lot of the traditional dates kicking off at Shannonville, and then you've also got a round at Calabogie, then the big event on the calendar, the Vintage Festival at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, better known as MoSport, and then you come back to Shannonville on Labor Day weekend to wrap up the championship. Again, what was the thinking about how aggressive a schedule you would put together for this year?
Well, I think we spent a lot of time talking about it over the winter, and I think the plan was to just go ahead and plan for the best case scenario with a parallel plan of what to do if things don't go well come the spring. So we kind of have both plans in place. We are hopeful that the schedule will run as we put it out there. But of course, the COVID situation is going to have a big effect on whether we're able to do that or not.
What plans did you have in place for last year that you had to shelve to celebrate what would have been the 40th anniversary of the VRRA?
Well, I think we had, it's hard to remember that far back, even though it was only a year ago. It seems like we've been through a lot since then. You know, we had planned some special events, especially at the final round at the Nelson, where, you know, things all started for the club 40 years ago. So we had planned to have some, you know, like a band and a bit of a party and those sorts of things. But of course, COVID coming along and ruining the party for everyone, we kind of clamped down on things. We were a little nervous about what the loss of our early rounds would mean financially for the club. We were very fortunate that the tracks were extremely cooperative and working with us and moving deposits around and things like that. So we were able to preserve the financial situation of the club, which was our biggest single concern, because, you know, you don't want to go in to try to plan something large like the Vintage Festival and then you just don't have enough attendance and, you know, no spectators. I think that would pretty much have torpedoed us pretty well there. It's an expensive venue to run, and, you know, the costs there have to be paid by both spectators and by the participants. And without either of those things guaranteed, we knew we pretty much had to shut it down for last year.
And what about in terms of classes? And we'll talk to both the USCRA and AHRMA about class structure. For 2021, have you made any adjustments to your class structure in terms of classes you're no longer offering, and maybe some new classes that you're looking at?
Well, we did introduce a new time period for us, period 5, on a trial basis. It was supposed to be a 2-year trial, with the last year being the first year. However, with only running a single round, we decided to extend that 2-year period for 2021 and 2022. So the period 5 essentially is we have P5F1, which is like 750cc multis, 1000cc twins, and up to about building year 1997, I believe. Basically, we're keeping it pre-fuel injection on the Japanese machinery. Did kind of keep out things like SV650s. That would be the F2 class. But we did spend a lot of time trying to think about the structure that would kind of cast the widest net and try to get as many of the manufacturers involved with competitive machinery. So in the F2 class, I believe it's 97, and that allowed the ZX6, the 97 ZX6, and a few others in that. So we had all 4 Japanese manufacturers will be well represented in the 600 class.
Okay. How do you balance the more modern classes like a period 4, period 5, and sticking to your roots back in 1980 when Doug Warwick and others started the VRRA? We were talking period 1 up to 67, and then a couple of years later, period 2. So it almost seems, as I did some homework for this show, that you've got the modern day race organizations sort of looking at adding some vintage classes, and what started out as the vintage organizations looking to add some modern day classes. It just economics, and how do you balance that?
Yeah, I actually neglected to mention that we actually have allowed some the lightweight modern bikes in, the 300cc, 400cc modern twins, basically. And we did that because we did have a cooperative event with CSPK a couple years ago at Calabogie. We felt that went very well. The bikes kind of fit in very well. And it was, for us, we spent a lot of time talking with the other organizations, and we all agreed that, it's good to give young riders more opportunities to ride, to build their confidence, build their skill set, so that they can, grow into, future champions. I think that was why we decided to allow that. And we started them off with the endurance race on Friday, and that went so well. We decided that we would also add them in for some sprint racing, for a sprint race on Saturday and Sunday.
Okay, Bob Coy and Doug Donlon, same question, trying to balance what the core and roots of the organization was, which was vintage, classic motorcycle road racing, but also now having to add some more modern classes, as AHRMA has with, Sound of Singles and Battle of the Twins and some of those classes that has a motorcycle that isn't dating back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, or even early 70s. How do you balance that out?
I think it's a case of economics is part of it. 10, 20 years ago, lots of guys were coming out with period 1 bikes. Period 1 machines are tougher to find. They're more expensive to keep and put on the track and keep running. You also have a change of generations where someone my age looks at the 80s as a vintage, not the 60s. So I think our club has kind of come to a place where we will always provide track time for authentic vintage post-classic machines. But, we need to keep things moving. And we've added a few modern classes, and we have a Formula 400, which is for all these fantastic lightweight machines that are very affordable. You don't need to do much to get them on the track. And we also added a Formula Twins class. So you have a lot of guys from some of the modern clubs that are now aging out. They don't want to race against a bunch of 18-year-olds. They're aging out. They have older machinery. There's a place for it. So we try to provide racing for anyone, any skill level. And especially with the Formula 400 class, one of the biggest growing segments of road racing is women. And not that women don't ride the big bikes, but we find that the Formula 400 class is a really great entry-level class for women, for new riders, and it's been quite popular. And unfortunately, even with the COVID, and even only having 2 events, those are 2 very well-attended classes, was the Formula 400 and the Formula Twins.
Bob Coy, have you discussed with Doug any new classes that you're looking at? And the other thing I wanted to ask you about, I think you were one of the first vintage road racing organizations to start introducing vintage sidecars, and I think both VRRA and certainly AHRMA are offering those classes as well. How do you decide when it's time to introduce a new class?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, when I reflect back on the vintage road racing in general, you know, when we started the vintage road racing in the mid 70s, it really started to take off in the late 70s, early 80s. And back then, you know, the Japanese manufacturers were really doing some constant improvement. So, you know, the 67 cutoff was kind of a break point. And then the 73 cutoff was another break point. And then you got into the really big multis with the TZ 750s. Then you got into the super bikes. So, you know, we look now and see where the most of the bikes are being located. And as Doug said, what's aging out of the modern classes, and we're picking that up. We have a very strong SV 650 class now. And, you know, Doug can fill in on that. He's more attuned to the newer bikes than I am. I'm still locked back in the 60s and 70s.
Doug, what do you see as perhaps a new class with a more current group of motorcycles that you're either thinking about, looking at adding to the lineup of USCRA classes?
Well, with the new addition of the Formula 400 and Formula Twins, we're really looking, those are brand new classes. They didn't really get a chance to launch last season. We're looking to launch them. In fact, what we did purposely was parody the rules that Moto America uses for Formula Twins, because we also want to look at our club as a conduit, if you will, to modern racing. For younger racers to come in, they need a place to get their chops before they move on to something like Moto America. We have a feeling of like a rising tide raises all ships. And if we can help grow the sport, it helps our club, it helps every club, it helps the sport in general.
Okay. Brian and Cindy, I want to cover that same topic with you in terms of the classes that AHRMA has traditionally had. And I think, you know, Class C, foot and hand shift, Classic 60s, Premier 500, 250, 350 Grand Prix. Those have been around for a long, long time, but you have constantly added new classes. How much of that is an economic consideration where you just need a larger entry, or you're seeing the demand there from the motorcycle racing community where you're adding sidecars, you're adding other formula classes?
It's a bit of both. Everything continues to get vintage, and it's AHRMA's mission statement to highlight and showcase vintage bikes. And we've been adopting bikes that are modern to some people, but are literally 20 years old. We just added the next gen superbike middleweight class, which is a lot of old 600s and 400s that have been sitting around that are nearly 20 years old. And it's about what our members bring to us. You know, we get the members' feedback that say, we'd like to have this, we'd like to have that. And we sit and listen and see if it is something feasible. And if it looks like it is, then we'll add it to the grid for a year on a probationary status. And if it continues to grow, then we'll keep it around. If it doesn't, we'll cut it. And that all has to balance to kind of give the opportunity to financially support an event.
Cindy, you're on mute, I think. There you go.
It's basically, we are trying to reach out to a younger population. As our bikes get older, we get older, and we're starting to see our ranks dwindle by attrition. So we're trying to grow our ranks and keep getting the younger audience in there. One of the ways that we are doing that is by adding more modern classes. One of the things my husband just texted me, reminded me to mention novice production classes. And we do have an entry-level class that allows people to basically take a street bike, and these are older bikes, but a street bike, put a belly pan on it, safety wire it, take off all of the DOD safety equipment, and go racing. A very cheap way to introduce somebody to racing that doesn't want to spend a lot of money in the beginning. And we get them in there and we hook them, and hopefully they stay. But the modern classes, that's going to be our younger audience, and we really need that.
Yeah. A couple of other things we touched on off the top. The plaque that's going to be unveiled on March the 10th at the Daytona 200 monument. I know Arthur Kowitz is one of the movers behind that. How did that all come about? And have you seen the artwork for the plaque?
I was somebody reached out to me, one of the people that manages the monument in Daytona. And I pitched it to Kurt, and he said it was a no-brainer. It's right within our realm with vintage motorcycling. So I have seen the artwork, and it's been approved. And I'll be saying a couple of words at the event. If Arthur's there and he would like to say some words, I'm certain that we can get him up there to say a couple of things. I've been going to the monument dedications for years, and it became especially poignant to us when Bob unveiled the Nobby Clark plaque, and we were able to participate in that dedication. And Alex said a few words. It was it's a special place. If you've not been there, you need to go.
I've been there many times, but I say to people, when you go to Daytona, if you haven't been in a while or if you're going for the first time, you got to include a trip down to the monument. It's right by the Hilton, right on the beach. It is an amazing, amazing place. The other thing I wanted to talk about, speaking of Daytona, USCRA, I know they have a Moto Giro, and Bob Coy and Doug do dabble into things like the Weirs Beach Hill Climb. VRRA is focused entirely on road racing, but AHRMA also gets involved with vintage motocross, flat track, off-road, and trials. And this year you just launched the Dick Mann Team Challenge after two-time Daytona 200 champion Dick Mann, where you've randomly put these teams together of riders from different disciplines to form a team, and you're going to be monitoring the points throughout the season. How did that all come about that really embraces not just road racing, but all of the other racing disciplines that are under the auspices of AHRMA?
Well, I'll take that. As part of the road race committee, one of my many hats I wear, it was discussed that we need to come up with a series that embraces all the practices within AHRMA, and to kind of create a cross all of AHRMA camaraderie, the team building process. So Arthur Kowitz assigned me the task to create something that would embrace everybody. And we've got cross-country, flat track, trials, and road race. And then it came about how to create the rules. We created the rules, and then through some sessions of talking it out, we came up with the Dick Mann name. And we had enough, we were hoping to get 6 teams together. We got enough for 5 teams. And a lot of good people applied for it, and with some interesting machinery. And the teams have been, the names are drawn and the teams are formed.
All right. Well, we'd love to get a copy of all of those teams that we can share on a future edition of Track Announcers Notebook. What people might not know about Dick Mann, he, of course, a two-time Daytona 200 champion in 1970 on the Honda and 71 on the BSA. But if you look back through the record books, 3 times Dick Mann finished second in the Daytona 200. So this year, we've got Danny Eslick looking to become another 5-time winner of the Daytona 200 along with Russell and Duhamel. But Dick Mann very well could have been a third 5-time Daytona 200 champion. But it sounds like a great idea. And I'm sure it'll grow as you move on past this initial year. I want to talk to Kirby Crosby. And Kirby, I know last year we lost some great people in VRRA, including Tom Falls, who was instrumental in VRRA and USCRA working on the AmCan Challenge that ran for many, many years. Has there been any discussion to pay tribute to a great motorcyclist and a great person in Tom Falls since we lost him last year with some kind of a special award?
Yeah, the executive is working on that right now. I don't think we've quite got the details 100% worked out, but we're definitely doing something this year for Tom.
That's awesome. Glad to hear. And Tom not only was instrumental with the VRRA, he was president for a while. Bob Coy, you knew him very well because I think those years where there was that cross-border AmCan Challenge that you worked very closely with Tom.
That was a super series, and we did work very closely with Tom. And we ran some interesting tracks. We ran a couple rounds actually out of Bridgehampton, back in the 80s. And, a lot of Canadians came down and ran that event. And we had a big corn roast on the beach there in East Hampton, which was neat. And then we had really great participation on both sides of the border, for the AmCan series.
Yeah. And Tom, of course, Cindy and Brian, I'm not sure how far back you go, but in addition to doing a bunch of vintage racing, Tom had some very quick Honda 750 equipment that he would put the likes of our top riders, Paul McMillan and John Ramsey, and go down there to Daytona when AHRMA was running at Daytona, and won a bunch of your Formula 750 races. I don't know if you recall seeing those back in the 1980s, I guess it would be.
Not me. I wasn't around then. Cindy might have been.
Before your time too, Cindy. Anyways, I look forward to seeing what the VRRA is going to do with certainly a very fitting and deserving award for the late Tom Falls. Cindy and Brian, for a while there, the event at Barber was always the second to last event, and you would wrap up your season at Daytona after kicking it off in March. But it seemed that as Barber grew and became this monstrous event, after that event, it was almost anticlimactic to go the next week to Daytona. How did that decision come about to take Daytona off the calendar and really focus on building what has been an incredible vintage road racing celebration at Barber Motorsport Park?
As the treasurer, along with being on the road race committee, the financial, Daytona was becoming a very big dud for us, being at the end of the year. It used to be, our second race of the season at the beginning of the year and very well attended internationally. And when we got ushered out and got offered an October date, we tried it on and it just fizzled out. All the bikes are done. They're all wore out. Guys are tired. They're not ready to go tear it up at Daytona. That's kind of a season beginner, not a season finale. So it just kind of found its own demise. You got any comments on that, Cindy?
I have to agree with that. It was pretty much of a letdown going from Barber with 50,000 spectators to Daytona with maybe 500. It was fun to do while it lasted, and I have fond memories because the first time I raced there, I actually won my race. So Navi Clark said that was probably a record that a woman wins their first race at Daytona. So yeah, fond memories of that. But we want to come back. We want to get back to Daytona, but we want to get back with a good date that's going to draw people, not the end of the year as a second thought.
Yeah. I know Bob and I have discussed this. Next year is going to be the 80th Daytona 200. I would hope the Speedway is going to be looking at doing some special things. And hopefully by next March, COVID is in the rear view mirror for the most part, and we can gather again. And I think there would be just tremendous support for AHRMA to return to Daytona in March of 2022 for that 80th Daytona 200. And I've talked to Bob about having 200 of the finest motorcycles going back to when they ran on the beach to all of the decades at running at the Speedway. And they would be this incredible display of 200 motorcycles to celebrate that 80th Daytona 200, but as well, bring back as many of the great names that have raced over the years. And the other thing is, because so many of us, including all the Canadian fans and racers, as they have traditionally done, come to Daytona in March, we can't do that this year. I think there'll be a tremendous upswell of people looking to get back to Daytona. And I think they could build an event, sort of a celebration of the Daytona 200, that could be incredibly popular and very well attended. So hopefully, if all of the stakeholders can come together and work together, we can create something very, very special, as well as the Daytona Monument event on the Wednesday next year. I think it's going to be special as well, because it'll be the 20th anniversary of that incredible initiative that Dick Clampforth and others started. And Bob Coy, I know you've sort of picked up the torch and have been part of it for a while. And it's great to see AHRMA supporting it with the plaque and the work that everyone at AHRMA has done with that. We've got just a few minutes to go. I'm going to sort of go around to our three organizations. We'll start with Cindy and Brian. What are your hopes for AHRMA in 2021?
If I could go first, as one of the things that we haven't even touched on, unless you did when I cut out, is we are starting a series of classic Moto Fests. Our inaugural one is going to be at the Heartland Motorsports Park at Memorial Day weekend. It's going to have every discipline for AHRMA competing there. It's going to be a big deal. And we're super excited about that. And then we're going from there to we'll be in Laguna Seca the third week in July, I believe it is. We won't have all of the disciplines, but we'll have most of them. And that also will be another very, very exciting event. Brian, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. That is a big deal for us. We are trying to form a festival on our own that leads the pathway to the festival at the end of the year with Barber, and really kind of expand the fan base and expose more people to the fun things we do.
Well, that sounds like an awesome new initiative, and we wish you all the best this weekend at Roebling Road throughout 2021. And if there's some way I can get to Barber in October, I'd love to get there for that weekend. Bob Coy and Doug Donnellan, your thoughts for USCRA for 2021?
Bob, you want to
get through the season without this COVID interrupting us again. The Speedway has been very generous in working with us and allowing us to do our events there. We're also coming up on the 100th anniversary of Laconia, and we want to try and develop some type of a monument up at the old Gunstock track to commemorate that, somewhere along the lines of the Daytona 200 monument. So that's going to be a project that we're going to be working on. And we'd certainly like to, get the Canadians back down across the border to attend our events. Doug, what do you have to say?
I'd like to say we'd like to get back across the border to attend their events as well. And I think if I have one wish for the 2021 season is for everyone that might be listening to find someone, bring them to the racetrack, get them involved. We need to spread the word. We need to get more people involved. So if we can get one new racer from a great show like this, that's progress. That's great.
Kirby Crosby, what about the VRRA? Can you have the 40th anniversary celebration in year 41?
Well, I think that's the plan. We're hoping it comes through and we're able to have the festival this year at Mosport, Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. That's, I think, everyone's wish. Leading up to the season last year, there seemed to be a lot of energy. We've talked about this. I talked about this a lot with the other executives, and we felt that the 2020 season was looking like it was going to be a bit of an uptick. And the schools were all full in February, which was, unprecedented. So we were very excited, and then COVID hit. So I think for 2021, we'd be very happy to pull out some new racers, and we already have about 14 to 16 new members for this season already signed up. So that's great. Schools are starting to fill up. We're kind of hoping there's going to be some pent up demand, and we're going to see more people out. But I have to agree with Douglas there. Hey, tell two friends and bring them along with you. It's a lot of fun. It can be done at reasonable cost. Not everybody will agree with that. And we try not to talk about it too much, but definitely come on out and have some fun, and work on your skill set. It's a great opportunity for people to come out and enjoy.
Well, and we also look forward to the second edition of the AmCan Challenge once that border's open. Stuart Nodell, I think we've got a couple of more questions before we wrap things up at 9 o'clock. And I want to mention that we were talking about him a little bit earlier. I saw that Dave Roper was on the call here, at least he was. And he'll be just one of the many racers at the opening round of the AHRMA Bridgestone Tires Historic Cup races that kicks off at Roebling Road this weekend. Stuart?
Yeah, actually, we just had a comment from Claude Gerard, and what he had pointed out is that getting young riders involved in the vintage racing scene, Jordan Zoke is a classic example, right? He started in the VRRA way back when he was probably about 13 or 14 years old, I'm assuming. So that was a point made. The other question really is probably for the folks in the US is, Roger stated that Summit Point Raceway is in the best condition it's ever been. Is there any possibility that the AHRMA would be going back there?
Cindy, Brian, Summit Point, is that a potential additional round? Not for this year, of course, but for 2022.
It's on our loose schedule we're putting together. We just the committee just started working on our schedule for next season. And Stuart, I will make a note and add that to the agenda for next one.
Awesome. That I'm sure Roger will be thrilled to hear that. And then the one final question I have, Pat, for Bob Coy comes via Phil Mahood, and he's asking if Bob remembers riding Dr. John Whitner's Moto Guzzi at Loudon in 1982.
I certainly do. It was 1986, and I high-sided it, and that really kind of stopped my solo racing for a number of years, and I switched over to sidecars, and I came back to one solo race in 2009 in Japan for a 7-hour endurance race. So I do remember that bike very, very well. It was a unique machine.
Yeah, that was one of the classic Battle of the Twins machines, and I believe a guy by the name of Mike Baldwin took over the ride after that, Bob.
Actually, it won the Battle of the Twins that year. And Larry Shorts was one of the riders.
Okay.
And,
yep.
And Doug Bronick was one of the riders. And I think Doug Bronick won the Battle of the Twins that year. And so Dr. John brought it up to Laconia on our Labor Day. It was actually an AHRMA event. And he put John Betancourt on originally, and John Betancourt said, I want to go party. So then Dr. John came and asked me if I'd ride it, and I said, sure. It was very unique, and it didn't have a rear brake pedal. And the front brake lever was a bias, did the front and rear. And it made me very uncomfortable. So we actually installed a fake dummy rear brake pedal so I'd feel more comfortable with it. But it was a phenomenal machine. But it could really wag its head, and that's what happened. It went into a speed wobble and pitched me off. Great machine, though.
Okay. On that note, we're going to wrap up this edition of Track Announcer's Notebook. Brian, safe travels through Texas. Now you know what us Canadians deal with for a few months up here. We're waiting for a foot of snow tonight here in Toronto. All the best with your racing this weekend. Cindy, great to have you on. All the best to you and Alex at Roebling Road, and have a great 2021 season. And God willing, I'll be at Barber in October. Bob Coy and Doug, all the best to you as well. Thanks for coming on. And again, if that border's open come June, we'll get to New Hampshire for your big race weekend. And Kirby Crosby, all the best to VRRA. Hopefully all 4 of those events kicks off, and you can finally have that celebration of 40 years of vintage road racing. And I look forward to hearing about the Tom Falls Award. Stuart, final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Just want to thank all the guests for joining us this evening. This has been a great conversation. And you were right, Pat, David Roper was on the call, or is on the call with us. So he would be a great guest for a future episode. I'm sure he's got a couple of stories to share. And I wish everyone all the best for a great and safe 2021, and look forward to one day when we can get back to the track.
Indeed. Brian, Cindy, Kirby, Bob, and Doug, thanks again. And that'll wrap it up. Our thanks to everyone who joined us here live on our Track Announcer's Notebook broadcast. If you got a friend who couldn't get on the show tonight, Stuart will have this broadcast up on our YouTube channel, Track Announcer's Notebook, by Thursday. Next weekend, speaking of Jordan Zoke, he'll be among our guests on the show next Monday night, talk about his fight for 15 as he goes after his 15th Canadian Superbike Championship. And it all started on a little vintage bike in the VRRA many, many years ago. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll see you back here next Monday night, 8 p.m. Eastern on Track Announcer's Notebook.